The 1st Marine Division had been formed in 1940 and trained in 1941 and shipped out in early 42, ultimate destination Guadalcanal, which we hit on August 7th, 42. The Navy, as you know, had been terribly damaged at Pearl Harbor. And we had every ship in the Pacific in on that invasion of Guadalcanal. If we lost any ship, there was nothing to replace it. Everything we had was on the line. So, 2 regiments, 2 rifle regiments, and an artillery regiment were landed on the first day. And then the Admiral called the commanding general of the 1st Marine Division, a guy named General Vandergrift, and said, "General, I have to pull out during the night. I got to leave you here the way you are. You're short on ammo, you're short on food, you're short on everything you need. I've got 1 full rifle regiment of your division still aboard my ships, but we got to get them out of here because the Japs will probably come down at night." So they sailed over the horizon. You can imagine how the guys in their foxholes felt. They saw the Navy disappear over the horizon. What the goddamn hell?
You felt abandoned.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there was more in play there. You see, this was August 7th. You may remember, immediately after Pearl Harbor, the American forces in the Philippines retreated into a peninsula south of Manila called Bataan. And they held out there until April against the Japs. And finally had to surrender because they ran out of food. The fighting then transferred to a fortified island in the Manila Bay called Corregidor. They held out for about a month till mid-May. Now Corregidor has surrendered in mid-May. You just landed on Guadalcanal on August 7th, and the fleet just disappeared. Are they going to leave us stranded like they did the people in Bataan and Corregidor? The guys in Bataan and Corregidor had a little motto. We're the battling bastards of Bataan. No mama, no papa, no Uncle Sam. And General Vandergrift, who commanded the division, had to work like the very devil, constantly telling people, this is not another Bataan, this is not another Corregidor. We will supply. You're sitting there in your foxhole thinking, yeah, a little bullshit. Anyway, the Japs did come down that night. They had a major naval base at a place called, I'll think of it in a minute, a few islands north of Guadalcanal. Their ships came down out of there, and they just shelled the living daylights out of everybody ashore. Everything from 3-inch deck guns up to 16-inch naval cannon. And this was hard to take. Shell fire is a terrible, terrible thing. There's nothing you can do. Just swivel down in the ground and hope you don't get hit. So as the dawn came, they sailed away, and our Navy came back over the horizon and landed the remaining supplies. But they didn't get everything ashore for 2 or 3 days. And that happened every darn night. Well, there wasn't much food. They were living on a lousy diet. They were using a lot of captured Jap stuff, which was fish and rice. They were short on quinine, which combats malaria. The white man and the white women cannot survive in the tropics without quinine because malaria will do them in. And they had none. So they're getting malaria, they're not eating right, they're getting shelled every night, you can't get any sleep, they're patrolling, building up defenses, fighting all day long. That's a pretty tough life. But they hung on and by their fingernails. The perimeter on Guadalcanal had a river on one side called the Matanacow, and on the other side called the Tenaroo. And the barrier across the northern end of the perimeter was a ridge, and that was fortified. One night the Japs made a supreme effort to crack that ridge and come across the top. It went hand to hand all night long in Marines hell. Dawn came and there were dead Japs all over the slope below them. And they weren't in too great shape themselves. That's how close it got. There's a guy here who participated in the campaign. I met him by accident. And he was quite forthcoming on some things and very remote on others. And I hesitate to approach him because he doesn't seem too outgoing. So anyway, in November, the Army put a division ashore and relieved the 1st Marine Division, who then went to Australia to fix themselves up for the next campaign. That was, at that time, that was when the name, that division patch was designed by a staff member on General Vander's staff, and the name Guadalcanal was put on there. The Marine Corps, after that, would not let anyone put a battle name on the remaining 5 division patches. They wanted the honor, they wanted a singularity to the Marine Corps, but that one survived. For instance, the 2nd Marine Division hit Tarawa, terrible slaughter, but they couldn't put Tarawa on their 2nd Marine Division patch because the Corps didn't want it. Now I guess I've answered your question.
Yeah, and Dad mentioned that your platoon had shot and killed 800 Japanese, and you had to stack them up, and then.
That was the Battle of the Tenarue River, which this guy here was in. He was a machine gunner. He told me we killed 800 of them. Good work. That's 800 we don't have to deal with. So that was early on in the Guadalcanal campaign.
Yeah. How is it that my father didn't go nearly what you went through, and he sobs when he talks about hardly anything that you've done, and how are you able to talk about it without getting upset?
Well, your dad, didn't he make 2 trips into occupied France before the invasion?
I don't know.
I think he may have. Let me do a sidebar here about him. After we made a beachhead in Normandy, we were in big trouble because the French had an area they called the bocage area. There were a lot of individual farms. They'd have, in 1 mile, they might have, 1 square mile, they might have 5 or 6 individual farms, but they're all divided. There's a ridge of earth with thick underbrush growing into roots sticking down into that ground. The natural defense is terribly hard to penetrate. When our tanks went up against them, they would rise up like that and expose their underside. And the German anti-tank guns would kill them by shooting through their unarmored underside. And the way we got out of there, they made a carpet bombing at a place called St. Lo.
Yeah, it was there.
They just blew the hell out of that place. And your father was involved in that. He was in it. And I said, Dave, how the hell did you had to know that was coming, the scuttlebutt. You were somewhat involved with intelligence. You had to know it was coming. What were you doing in the target area? And he said, the Air Force messed up.
Yeah.
They hit the wrong area. There were dead cows hanging up in trees, bodies, stuff like that.
And we lost 600 of our own men from friendly fire.
Is that right?
Yeah, at St. Lo.
Okay. Well, that was in Europe. Let's go back to the Pacific. I've talked to you about a little bit about Guadalcanal. I've talked to you about our introduction of the atomic age. What else can I talk to you about that you might like to hear?
When did you get married after the war?
I got married in 1961.
So that was considerable. That's when the Reds won the pennant, right? 61.
I think so.
Yeah. And you went to Hughes High School?
Yes.
That's where Dick Ward went. Did you know Dick Ward went?
Very well. He was quarterback, class president, big guy.
And he was in the Air Force. He's my godfather.
Sir?
He's my godfather. Dick Ward is.
Well, he was a godfather. He was a guy on a pillar to me. My sister, when he were in the same class, he'd come around and date my sister every now and then. As I said, he was quarterback, captain of the football team, class officer. That's a lot.
Were you drafted into the Marines, or did you enlist?
No, after I turned 18, I became eligible for selective service, which was a national draft,
And what year was that?
44.
44.
And I picked the Marines because I figured if I had to fight somebody, I'd just as soon fight them because of all the stuff they'd done to us.
Right.
We were sworn in down in the federal post office on Fountain Square. And we were sworn in and we signed the papers, and the recruiting sergeant said, well, you boys are going to San Diego. Remember, travel then was all by train. San Diego, holy cow, that's the other side of the world. So 4 days and 3 nights on a troop train from Chicago to San Diego, the high point of which was when the locomotive broke down at high noon in the middle of the Arizona desert. Now that was fun.
And your basic training was in San Diego?
Sure.
Your basic training was in San Diego?
Yeah, boot camp, and then I went to line camp at a place called Camp Pendleton, which is north of San Diego. It's a big Marine base, 400,000 or 500,000 acres. It's still there.
Yeah.
It's probably the only unspoiled area on the West Coast.
Huh.
In September, I went overseas.
September of 44?
Yes. They drove us down in big trucks from Pendleton to San Diego to go aboard ship. And as we drove through the streets of San Diego, the people were cheering, hooray, give those Japs hell for me. I was thinking, they were pretty keen about me giving the hell, but not them, but I didn't say anything. So we went aboard ship. And we sailed. I was out down below decks. I came up on deck. The sun was sinking in the west. It was very gray and cloudy. California had dropped below the eastern horizon. There was nothing around but cold gray sea, cold gray sky. And the crewman came by. I said, hey buddy, where do we form up the convoy? He said, what do you mean convoy? We go over by ourselves. I guess my face blanched because he said, don't worry, we've already done it twice. But that was a very spooky moment with a gray world and a gray sea around me. So I said, well, I'm going below decks. Below decks was vomit central. There was vomit everywhere. You stepped down the metal gangways, there was metal vomit on the steps. The gangway metal railing had vomit all over it. And I hung out down there as long as I could. I can't stand this. So I went back on deck. It's dark. Can't see it. This authoritative voice rings out. You, follow me. Clearly an officer. So I followed him. And he leads me up to the forecastle. Now that's the forward part of the ship. You've seen them, they're raised up, and the bow comes together there. And there was a 3-inch deck gun up there with a gun crew, 5-man gun crew sacked out around it, nice warm sleeping bags. All I had on were my dungarees. So he gave me a K-Pock jacket, and from somewhere he pulled out a Jungle Jim pith helmet, put that on my head. He said, you're up here for a 4-hour watch, don't let anybody come up here. Well, that's like posting sentries to keep people from climbing Mount Everest. Nobody's going to come up on that godforsaken thing. The sea was breaking over it. The gun crew laughed at me and said, okay, jarhead, freeze. That was in our service stuff. So I went up the extreme forward end of the deck where the front of the ship came together in a V, and I sat down in that V. It was out of the wind and warmer, and I did my 4 hours there. This is the kind of useless stuff you encounter in the service. There's nothing you can do about it except obey the order.
Well, did you actually, were you involved in hand-to-hand combat with the Japanese?
No, it didn't go hand to hand, but it went rifle shot to rifle shot. I stayed away from hand to hand.
Mm-hmm.
They drilled us in that, and we had bayonet drill and hand to hand. And my private reaction to that was, the hell with this stuff. I had a good military rifle, the M1, and 30 caliber slug, 8 rounds, semi-automatic. I thought, I'm going to learn to load, shoot that from the hip. Going to learn to load real fast, reload real fast. I went out in the jungle on Sunday afternoons and practiced firing from the hip. So I was able to board rifle hand to hand in that fashion. I did have one experience that was a little frustrating. The Japs were masters of camouflage. Those guys are human moles. They were killing and maiming my buddies all around me, and we could never see them. Where are they? They'd be a little hole in the middle of the bushes that the rifle fire would be coming out of. Well, finally we get one guy who came out for some reason, and he's charging us about 70 yards away. Thought, oh, happy day, I finally get to shoot one of these guys. And I went into a kneeling position and lined up my rifle and squeezed the trigger. The M1 is a military rifle. When it goes off, you got a bang and you get a kick in the shoulder. All I got was a dull click, the firing pin striking the base of the cartridge. The safety was off. The only thing it could be was a dud cartridge. Now there's a procedure to extract a dud cartridge from the chamber of the rifle, but it doesn't lend itself in any way to the imperatives in the next 3 or 4 seconds, which was all I had involved. So I was coming up out of my kneeling position. This guy's coming at me, bayonet out front, lickety-split. Not to worry, on my right-hand side stood Tony Amato, a fine young Italian guy who hailed from New Jersey, armed with a Thompson submachine gun, which is a close-range weapon with absolutely enormous killing power. He opened with his Thompson and a charging jump, slammed back onto the ground like a crumpled doll. Well, I immediately extracted the dud cartridge and replaced it with a live one. And I walked over and kicked the Jap 3 or 4 times just to let him know how I felt about things. So that was as close as I came to bayonet stuff.
Mm-hmm. I just don't understand how you can talk about this and while other people, my father, for example, called me up at 3 o'clock in the morning about a month ago, and he was having a nightmare, and he said, Buzz, I'm being shot at, and you need to come over and bring guns. And I'm in a field and I'm exposed. And
I didn't have it that rough. I don't have anything that bothers me. That woman I shot on Oki bothers me. But I didn't have things that tough.
Yeah. So it's just your personality and Dad's personality.
I beg your pardon?
It's just your personality, just the way you are.
Okay.
Because
Well, I've rambled on here.
do you have some questions for him? Because this is your, did you have your list of questions?
Yeah, I had a couple. Is this the Southern Cross here on your?
Yes.
It is. Oh, that's interesting. Was when you and when the first Marines landed on Guadalcanal, was that did they have an air base there yet?
Did they what?
The Japanese have an air base?
The Japanese, well, you have Guadalcanal, you have a body of water called the Sea Lark Channel, then you have 3 islands up on the north side of that body of water. The Japanese were on those 3 islands, but the only forces on Guadalcanal itself were a Korean labor battalion. And as soon as the shell fire started, they took off. So there was no opposition to the landing.
So they're about to build the air
The
base.
high Marine brass had said, we can take it without a problem. Holding it will be the problem, and that was. That's where you get into stuff like the 800 dead Japs and the Battle of the Ridge and stuff like that.
When did you get out of the service?
I left China in March 1946, and I was discharged at Great Lakes sometime in mid-April.
Of 1946?
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the luckiest days of my life, we were in camp on Okinawa after the island was secured, and we lived in a sea of rumors. Next time we hit Formosa, it'll be bad. Next time we hit the Kuril Islands, which are north of Honshu, it'll be bad. Next time we hit the home islands, and basically we're all dead. And then in August, a rumor came around, hey, we dropped some kind of new bomb. It blew up a whole city at once. Yeah, sure, blah, blah, throw it off. And they're telling the Japs to surrender. Oh, hell, they'll never surrender. Don't even think about it. Don't go there. Then they dropped the second bomb on Hiroshima, on Nagasaki 2 days later. Then word came out, Japan surrendered. Holy cow. This is an emotional, you got it made up back in the back of your mind, you probably won't survive the invasion of Japan. And all of a sudden you don't have to do that. What do you do? Well, a day or so later, I doped off from a work detail, went out in the woods by myself and sat under a tree and did what today we call screwing your head back on. So I was out there for about an hour thinking, what do I do now? What was I going to do before I went into service? Where am I going? Well, I'll go home. What was I going to do before I came in? Well, I was going to go to UC. Well, maybe that's the thing I should do. It didn't come that quickly or that easily. That is the luckiest day of my life.
When the war ended?
Yeah.
When the Japanese surrendered?
The Japanese surrendered. Holy cow. In the face of all this stuff I just described, these guys surrender. Unbelievable.
And you thought for sure you were going to have to go to the mainland?
Oh, yeah, yeah. As I said, if we hadn't dropped those bombs for the last 70 years, I'd have been pushing up daisies on a place called the Plains of Tokyo.
Yeah. And then you went, after you got home in 1946, did you go to UC?
Yeah.
And you went on GI Bill?
Oh, yeah. And as I told, I grew up in Clifton. I'd gone to Clifton School and Hughes High School, which are both on Clifton Avenue. Hughes right across from UC. So I'd walk home every afternoon. I thought, you know, I'm kind of a rut. I gotta get out of here. There was a funeral home in Clifton. I walked past, I'd look at the funeral home and said, gee, you know, yeah, I ought to get out of here. So after 2 years at UC, I transferred to Miami and graduated from there. And I liked both places, but I just got tired of traveling up and down Clifton Avenue.
Yeah. Yeah, Miami's a fun school too. My dad was asked to re-enlist at Camp Atterbury in Indiana, and that's the only time in my entire life I heard him say the word fuck. And he never said it in front of me ever, and he never has
That's what I
since.
told the guy.
Yeah, he said, fuck you.
Probably mild compared to some of the stuff he got. I went through that at Great Lakes when I was being processed for discharge. I was interviewed by some guy. And the rumor was that the government could hold you at the convenience of the government for 6 months, COG, convenience of government. I thought, you know, if I lip off to this guy, he may just COG me. I'm not going to say anything smart to him. He said, you want to re-enlist? I said, no, sir. And I was prepared. I had a story. My father's dead and my mother's teaching school and doing seamstress work at night, and my sister's got a paper route, and I got to get home and make some money for the family. I was going to use that if I needed to, but I didn't need to. He said, okay. And that's why I would have liked to be more stronger, but for that reason, I wasn't about to.
Yeah.
The military have a way of getting things done. And I could hear him saying, okay, wise guy, back to China for 6 months. After the war, after the surrender, my division was sent into what was called North China. Well, that sounds about as remote as you could get, but it turned out to be the area around their capital, now called Beijing, which then was called Peking. And we wound up in a industrial city midway between Peking and the sea. And we were building in a grade school. And on the day that we got there, I rode in 5 very different methods of transportation. I rode on the troop ship that took us up from Okinawa. Its draft was too deep and couldn't land us, so they had to give us a shallow draft vessel. They put us on the landing craft infantry, which is a long rectangular hull with 2 ramps down the front, and the troops moved down the ramp. It was not for combat landing, but it was for getting a lot of troops ashore in a non-combat area. So that was the second one, landing craft infantry. We were a few miles from where we were going, so they had trucks there waiting to take us. They were the funniest looking trucks I'd ever seen. You had the driver behind the wheel. Then behind him, you had a boiler fired by a little charcoal furnace. They throw charcoal in the furnace. And I can only surmise that they used high pressure steam to rotate the drive shaft with. Anyway, it worked and it got us there. So we're billeted in this grade school, and look out, and there across the way are the bright lights of downtown Tinsend. And we wanted to get there, the hell of it is the whole school. But there was a river in between, so a Chinese boatman rowed us across the river. And when I got on the other side, I rode in my final mode of transport for that day, which was a rickshaw pulled by a human being. So those are my 5 methods.
Yeah.
Well, listen, guys,
Anybody else have anything? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr.
you've been very patient. Thank you.
Thank you. We really